Good morning, Choice Residential. Hope your day's off to a fantastic start. Today, I want to talk about personal property that gets left at a listing, and you're there to do the final walkthrough. You see some personal property. Maybe it's out in a shed, it's a lawnmower and yard tools and things like that. Maybe some deck furniture, but personal property that belongs to the seller that wasn't supposed to be in the home. And what happens if the buyer chooses to proceed to closing? This question has come up many times, and oftentimes agents are advising their clients incorrectly and could put themselves in some legal hot water. Sometimes the common thought is that, well, if the seller left it there and we go to close, it now becomes the buyer's property because the buyer now owns the house. Everything that was left in the house is now the buyer's. However, that does not pass the legal test. Property that is left at the home for the buyer to be able to claim, two things need to happen legally in North Carolina. Number one, the buyer would need to prove that the seller actually intended to relinquish that property. So they did not want that property, they intended it to stay with the house. And then the second element of that is they need to prove that the seller actually then did relinquish it. So they intended to leave it and then they did leave it, or they did relinquish it. It's not always clear that, especially that the seller intended to do it. So if you close on the house as the buyer, and then the listing agent calls or emails the agent, the buyer's agent says, hey, the seller left their riding mower and yard tools in the shed. They're going to come by next week to get it. As the buyer's agent or the buyer, you can't say, well, sorry, we closed on the house. That stuff is now ours. That's not legally true. So you want to make sure that as the agent, we aren't getting involved in that kind of false thinking. Now, the best thing to do if you are the buyer's agent and you're going to the final walkthrough, there is personal property left. You need to contact the listing agent and get some kind of resolution, because if the buyer closes, they're now going to be legally responsible for protecting that personal property so that the seller can come get it later. Now, how much time needs to pass before the seller has relinquished that personal property? I don't have an answer for you. It's going to be a case-by-case basis. And so if the buyer is unhappy about having to retain and protect that property for the seller to get later, they need to seek legal counsel. We certainly can't advise on that. But once the buyer closes, they've now put themselves in that situation. Leaving the personal property there is a breach of contract. But again, that alone does not make it become the buyer's property. So the buyer's real leverage here to make sure that property gets removed in a timely manner is to not close on the house. So I realize that's not always an easy decision to make. But when there is trash, debris, personal property, things left in the home that weren't supposed to be there per the contract, not closing is the buyer's leverage. Otherwise, you at least need to get on the same page with the seller in terms of what their expectations are with that property. Get that in writing. If they say, hey, I don't want that stuff, the buyer can do whatever they want. Don't let that just be a phone call between the agents. Make sure you have an email detailing what is left and what the seller's intentions are with those things. If they do want that personal property, when do they intend to come and get it? And what happens if they don't get it by that time? You want to settle all of this prior to closing if possible. And if you need help sorting those details out and documenting it, please use the closing attorney to help you do that. But you don't want your buyer closing on the property and then thinking that that personal property is now theirs. So if you ever have questions about this, get into a weird, sticky situation, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We want to make sure you have good information to provide to your clients so that nobody gets themselves into legal hot water. All right, hopefully this has been helpful for you. If you have other questions, let us know. Otherwise, as always, take care and we'll see you next time.